Morning, everyone. I'm Alexia Cox. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning for Educor, and I'm going to ask these panelists some grueling questions. But before we get in and before we introduce our panelists, I'd just like to say that I've been to a couple of DOMITS events before, and the panel sessions to me are often the most impactful because we're giving a voice to those that need to be heard. We're giving a voice to multiple different perspectives, and it's opening up a conversation. In my eyes, it's opening up a conversation that we're just not having enough. I'm not saying that we're not having it, but we're definitely not having it enough. And for me, the power of this panel and these conversations and these questions is just really, profound, speaking from my own perspective. Now, I think it is now time to find out who I'm going to be asking these grueling questions to. So, can you please introduce yourself? Just tell us, who you are, where you come from, your organisation that you work for.
Sure, I hope you're not expecting me to start from where I was born.
You can give us the history.
Who you are.
We only have a few minutes.
All right, my name is Mvula. Yoyo. Mvula is a Xhosa word that means rain. So it's not unusual that it's raining. But anyway, my job title is Transformation Executive. I should be saying outgoing Transformation Executive at the end of this month. I'm saying that so that you don't wonder when you see somebody else on the 1st of October. The nature of our business is, as I said, Mediclinic. It's, we're managing 52 hospitals across the country. We've also got hospitals abroad. But the main one for me is today is just to share with you where we at. And we're not really anyway. You'll hear about that later.
I'm Shameemah Fayker. I'm from Sanlam. I'm in the group HR department, responsible for the transformation compliance as well as leadership development. So it's the nature of our business being insurance, financial services. We're the biggest insurance company on the African continent. But we also got an international presence we're in India, we're in Malaysia, we are in Lebanon, we are in the UK, and then we've also got a very small presence in the US.
Hi, I'm Judy Robinson. I'm the director of the Academy, which is the accredited training provider for WNS Global Services. Many of you would have driven past our building on the way here, which is the big building opposite with the big triangles. WNS is a global business process outsourcer, business process management business. Many of you will favorably think of it as a contact center, but it's actually more than that. But it's really our focus is on how you can assist other businesses to transform their business processes and in numerous ways, and nowadays actually a lot more in the technology space. And however, remains a people-intensive business, remains a wonderful first opportunity for young people exiting and entry into the world of work. And my focus over the last 4 years has been to build an academy that allows for inclusion of all previously marginalized groups into our workplace for sustainable and meaningful careers as such. Sometimes we got it right, sometimes we didn't. So happy to share the good and the bad and the ugly with you today.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you, everyone. Right, so I tried to have an answer ready for this first question myself because it's not necessarily an easy question. You might not have the answer to it. So my question that I wanted to ask, and if you're comfortable with sharing, is the percentage of your workforce that is disabled. And then next to that, I think it leads quite nicely into, if you take a look at your own personal organization at the moment, what are some of the initiatives that you have put in place and that you're planning to put in place to increase, obviously, the percentage of disabled people working in your workforce? That's a big question. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll take it. We have less than 1% PWD, people with disabilities. And hence I said earlier on, we have a long way to go. And for me today, reason I wanted to take part in today's proceedings is precisely to say where we at, and maybe also get a couple of ideas from people who've moved beyond where we at. Now, getting to a point of 1%, I'm talking 14,391 as of yesterday. You can imagine how much 1% is, but if I take you back 2 years, we actually had less than 100 people in the company with disability. Now, the challenge obviously is, firstly, are people comfortable to declare? Because I'm sure we definitely have more than 100 and something people out of 13,000. So the first hurdle is really to get to the point where people are prepared to do it. Now, we're at a stage where we are now focusing on, firstly, getting people to declare. Because if you're going to have a focus on getting in the company people with a disability, the question is going to be, why do we want to do that? Remember I think it was Jeremy who shared that with us, the little clip about somebody saying, why do we have to worry about people with disabilities at the entrance to a hotel when you don't have them? So that kind of mentality would also impact on whether it's possible for us to attract or even to accommodate people with disabilities. So the first challenge then, therefore, for us is to focus on people currently in the workplace. In other words, how do you bring people into your house when those in your house don't feel comfortable? And therefore, the issue of inclusivity is for us more important than just to have people with disabilities. It's like saying your target is to have a diverse workforce. But is it inclusive? I mean, are you prepared to accommodate those people? And if we start by situating the debate around people with disabilities from the point of view that it's really all about discrimination, it's easier for people to relate to that, because in some way or the other, all of us have been exposed to discrimination. Remember we spoke earlier about getting buy-in. Now you can't get buy-in from somebody who doesn't imagine what we're talking about. So if we have a broader view of disabilities being part of a broader view of what? Of discriminating against people, either as, from the point of view of gender, race, age, and all of those. Now, another challenge we have as a company that's got business abroad as well is, how do you convince people in another country as part of your group strategy? How do you convince people to include in their strategy something that's not a challenge wherever they are? In our case, it will be race. That will be difficult to tell people in Switzerland, where we have a big business, to include race. But luckily, as far as people with disabilities is concerned, it's a generic, a general one. So it's sort of easier to do it. But yeah, I think the other comments would come as we go along.
Can I just build on that?
Of course.
So within our organization, I went to just double check our stats this morning because I wanted to give the accurate stats. In that we are 1.5% of our workforce is disabled. Of that 1.5%, 1.1% is Black. So we nowhere near in terms of where we would like to be. If I also compare the company a good couple of years ago in terms of where we were at, there were very, very few people with disabilities in the organization. However, with the use of learnerships, we use learnerships as a platform to bring in people with disabilities into the organization. And what we've tried to do at base is the absorption. So we wouldn't go in with large numbers, but we would try to keep it low so that we can absorb them into the system. And then we also would transfer that or change once they complete the learnership and we put them onto an internship. Sadly, it is all about the numbers, in that the FSC scorecard was driving that in terms of keeping the numbers high. with the change in the definition of absorption now, in that the definition is now looking at permanent employment and not necessarily only FTCs, we've actually declined slightly in terms of, because now we're not putting the people with disabilities on internship. So the challenge is that, and I think one of the speakers spoke about it earlier, is that we're bringing in people with disabilities into the organization, but where are they? They are in the lower levels. And the challenge is, how do you ensure that you're bringing in people at all levels? So in terms of when you recruit, yes, we put on the advert that we encourage people with disabilities to apply, but do they apply? No, they don't. So I think that's the one challenge. The other thing is also, what I found is that yes, disability hasn't really been, it's part of your employment equity strategy and things, but it's not necessarily been integrated into business strategy. And so you do things tend to also in terms of ad hoc. So you run awareness campaigns and then you do a disclosure exercise and then you get less than 1% increase in terms of the disclosure. But it's because we haven't really done it, it's not integrated. Now, with I think the disability falls within diversity and inclusion. So like Mvula had indicated, we're also an international company, so race is not an issue in the other countries. However, gender is as well as people with disabilities. So we need to look at more of a diverse and inclusive strategy, where we will then have to look at disability. But what Jeremy highlighted in his session as well is, and I liked your session, Jeremy, thank you very much, in terms of having that one pager, in terms of a strategy, in terms of how to address bringing in people, and not necessarily only in terms of people with disabilities, but in terms of gender, because gender is a big thing as well. And I think that the spotlight is going to shine even brighter on our company, in that just last week we had one of our board meetings and they had questioned the low figure of people with disabilities. So I think we're going to have to do something a lot more integrated within the company to get people to firstly to disclose, and then secondly in terms of bringing in people. So the strategy would need, do we buy in, or do we develop and then allow people to disclose in there? But it's the environment that needs to be correct to encourage that disclosure.
Thank you. Judy?
I think I take a bit more of a philosophical approach, and I'm always the controversial one in the room. So, is I don't know, because I don't measure it that way. So, for me, it's never been around meeting a tick box or a target. I've kind of got a common saying that I say it's about the goal, not the target. Yeah. And do we understand the difference between what a target and a goal is? And the next controversial thing I will say is, sometimes we do the right things for the wrong reasons and then end up worse off than where we started. And sometimes we do the right things for the right reasons and end up where we want to be. And I think that's really the philosophy I've applied in this space. And I've also been controversial enough to say, if you're not going to do it with the right intent or the right support or the right investment, we're not doing it at all, because the negative impact of doing it wrong is worse than the impact of just doing it. So what I can commit to is that we say that there is a dedicated focus on opening up access to opportunities for the disability community in every opportunity that we have. Whether that's an entry-level job opportunity or a more senior-level job opportunity. And we also have a distinct strategy to take our development or our ability to create access beyond our own. So we actually do a lot more time and investment out there in the community and the market to drive disability access to opportunities for viable, sustainable careers, and not just jobs and not just seats outside of our own. So we run large-scale projects, and we utilize some really great technologies in the learning space to enable access and to accommodate learning that's hyper-individualized. I think earlier we spoke a little bit around you have to have an individual approach to everybody. I think our biggest way of contributing to this is these types of things, where myself and my team have as much exposure as possible to all of you, so that we can understand the dynamics in the world and what's needed and what's preferred and what's wanted. And later on today, you'll see our graduate development program that we ran with 5 candidates, and that was my entire investment for that year. It was 5 candidates at a post that were going to go through for a postgraduate program to develop our disability talent, not target talent, at middle management level. So that's kind of just my philosophical view on that question, if that answers it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's been really enlightening. You're all addressing obviously the disability initiatives within your organisation and differently, which is perfectly okay, because it's that's you're stepping in the right direction and you're moving in that direction. But I'm sure along the way you've had a number of lessons and challenges along the way. Would you care to share with the audience some of the lessons that you've learned?
I think the one thing that we've learned is that I think firstly the positive is that we've changed the stigma around employing people with psychosocial disabilities. In that in the last few years now we've taken quite a few people with psychosocial disabilities. And I think that the one that we learned there was working with line managers. We needed to, and it wasn't rolling out like, you could do a WiNN campaign, so you're rolling out to the entire company. You're now going to inform everybody in terms of what the different disabilities are, and how to and sensitizing the workplace and things, but we did it as and when it was happening, and we targeted the areas where the individuals were going to be based. And I think that was the biggest learning for us, was working with those line managers, getting them involved in the process, and then sensitizing the workplace. But we also worked with OTs. We worked with not only people within the organization, but we actually outsourced as well to get people to come in to prepare for the business. For me, it is that, it is one part of the business that is doing exceptionally well, and the other part's not necessarily.
What's the difference? Why do you think that is?
I think it's the nature of the business, in that we can term it's in the retail sector of the business, and also the biggest part of the business as well, so they can accommodate. The other lesson that we've also learned is that you can't take, for me, it's like you take, just because one person with a disability doesn't necessarily mean that you know the needs and requirements of all disabled people. It just doesn't work that way. So it was also getting them involved, engaging with the persons, in that there was one example that I could use. The one department had an event. They were doing a team building exercise. And the one individual was in a wheelchair. And he didn't RSVP to say that he's going. And then when the line manager asked him, but why are you not going? He said, am I going to get there? And then she said, no, but we've arranged buses. The buses is going to cart you guys there. I can't get into the bus. How am I going to get into the bus? So it was those type of things. And the thing was engage the individual. So it's nothing about us without us. I think that was from that perspective.
That conversation. Yeah.
I think the one important issue for us has been alluded to earlier, and that was guarding against working in silos. Because if transformation department, which I heard, is going to be the department from which anything like this is driven, is going to be looked at as a transformation challenge or a transformation problem. So what we've done, it's still very, very recent. The department is old itself, but it hasn't been able to get to a point where we can really say, look, this is our flagship in terms of people with disabilities. But what's I think worth mentioning is it's absolutely important for us to start at the top. I've always believed that bottom up approach is the best. But in corporate environment, in corporate South Africa, in my environment anyway, it doesn't work. Bottom up doesn't work. You gotta start eating the elephant from its from its slug. But anyway, from the trunk. okay?
Sorry.
Your tail.
But for me, it has worked. For instance, with our transformation strategy, we've had this department for 10 years now at Mediclinic. This is year number 11. But we only started working on it very dynamically over the past 2 years. And I can tell you, if you look at what we are doing now in terms of transformation at Mediclinic, compared to the past 8 years, the last 2 years have been tremendous. And the reason being that we start with the elephant from the top. Because, if we're just in an environment where when the executive says jump, people would ask you how high. I know in other environments, it's a question of asking people at the bottom to be the first ones because they're going to implement anyway. But with us, it's kind of different, which is also why I, also in the spirit of working across silos, I've brought somebody from the company to maybe add briefly on what I had said, Dr. Essel, to maybe share what we are doing.
Okay. So I'm Dr. Except I'm the corporate health manager for Mediclinic Southern Africa, and part of my portfolio is developing the health and wellness strategy. So some of the initiatives that we're currently busy with, or we're busy formulating, is that inclusivity. How do we include people with disability into wellness initiatives as well? How do we tailor-make those programs? So you might get the able person that has a specific wellness program. How do we tailor-make those programs to accommodate those people with disabilities? And obviously, we've got the disability drives, and the various wellness initiatives can range from lifestyle diseases to other programs that the company is actually running. So so when we develop a program, the disability, or we accommodate in each of those programs people with disability. So it could be maybe we're running a program with musculoskeletal, or people with back pain or shoulder pain or something like that in terms of ergonomics. There will be a component that would make latitude for people with disabilities as well.
Thank you for that.
So you will note, just the last, but you will note that we haven't really been speaking about employment initiatives. In other words, how do we go out and attract people? For us, it's more important to create an environment in which people with disabilities will be able to function to their utmost best than just passing in people for the sake of being diverse. So for us, it's inclusivity is more important than diversity, if I can put it like that. I'm hoping it doesn't sound contradictory.
Thank you. And Judy, you mentioned at the very beginning when you started talking that you've done things right and you've had some challenges along the way. And you said you'd be open to sharing them with the audience. So I'm going to take that opportunity to ask you to share that, please.
Yeah, I think sometimes where we as employers fall short is potentially with good intention, but an arrogance and an ignorance. I don't know if it's arrogance or ignorance in thinking that we understand and we know it all, and that we can create these wonderful environments that are supportive of people, but we take generalist approaches to it, which is, as we know, it's not going to necessarily work. You also maybe sometimes take informed approaches, so people with disability X or people with disability Y, this is what they need, this is how you should accommodate them. And then, as we heard this morning, somebody within that disability has got a completely different requirement or need, or might not even have that requirement or need. So it's really around two systemic things. One is the system itself, and one is the individual. So if I look at the system itself, is you have to address an ecosystem. And if I go back to Psych 101, which is many, many years ago, the one lesson I learned was if you're wanting to challenge somebody's prejudice or stereotype, you have to put them face to face with that thing, and they have to see evidence that it behaves differently, right? So you actually have to, for a prolonged period of time, be exposed to the opposite of what you've been led to believe. And so often we are not equipping with the right tools, skills, or support or ecosystem, people entering our world, and exactly what we don't want to have happen happens. In that, due to no fault of their own, almost like a system's failed them, they are proving to those within which you're trying to sensitize all the behaviors that they've had a stereotype about. Disabled people can't perform, or they're difficult to manage, or they take too much time and effort, and it's extra investment. And why is that? That's not because that's a fact. That's because we haven't set up the environment or provided the accommodation or necessary understanding to do that. And we need to take responsibility for that. And then on the other hand, it's that individual's requirement to be able to, like any other talented person coming to the organization, to be considered as top talent, as fresh talent, as somebody who has to be provided with the right levels of tools, support, good leadership, management, tools of the trade to be able to do their job properly.
How do you do that?
As you would do with anybody else that starts.
Okay.
My key thing is there's no difference once we've equaled the playing fields.
Yes.
I mean, one of the critical challenges we spoke about in a recent thing was, do we performance manage disability differently? And then why? If you've followed the right process up front, if you've assessed this person as being a fit for the job, if you understand even if there's a small gap for development, but you've provided the time and the space to do that, why would there be a need to be treated differently? And it's really around, again, if you're doing it for the right reasons, with the right time, with the right support, with the right accommodation, it's like any recruitment and performance decision. If you haven't done that up front, that's when you start asking those questions.
Fantastic.
Sorry, Alex?
Yeah.
5 minutes.
5
and then
minutes?
We'll do 5 minutes of questions.
Okay. I'd like to end. I'd have lots of more questions to ask you, but I'd like to sort of ask you guys, if there's one thing that you could say to the audience that is sitting in front of you, you've got a diverse audience, you've got employers, you've got employees, there's a number of different people sitting here. What would it be? What advice or tip or question do you have from an employer perspective that you could openly say to the audience to start that conversation or continue the conversation?
I'll say that. Go for it. Just because I think it's so important. The biggest gift you could ever give, and please, this might be coming from, I completely don't know how it comes across, but the biggest gift you could ever give a young person with a disability wanting to enter the world of work is to ensure that they've had the very best and very proper and correct diagnosis of what they are experiencing. Because in many instances, just incorrect diagnosis or incorrect medication has created a disability that shouldn't actually exist. If it was, and many young people don't have access to that caliber and quality. The very first thing I would always do if I'm bringing people in, particularly with social psych. Those ones, I don't need to be politically correct, is to ensure that the medical treatment and diagnosis that they're getting and that the meds or the accommodation that you're supporting are the right ones. It's a life-changing thing. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes we are overly PC, politically correct. And at other times, we are insensitive as well. And it's really about balancing that. Being politically correct is something that we all will be striving for because you don't want to offend anybody. But sometimes in the process of doing that, you are actually offending the person that you are engaging with. And I'm sure all of us can relate to that, whether it's about race or disability, where you end up being condescending, being paternalistic. An example for me is that one of our senior managers is somebody who's in a wheelchair. And every time she had to step into a meeting, we've always tried to assist. And the point is, to cut a long story short, the point is to give the person an opportunity to actually say, I want to be helped, and not assume that because they're in a wheelchair, therefore. And for me, that's something that we need to be aware of every time, especially when you bring in somebody new in the environment. The same applies to race. Somebody telling you, okay, you are closer, and therefore, if it's a male like myself, have you been to the mountain school? And you're like, why? You are closer, aren't you? Yes. So, generalizing, stereotyping. So I think for me that's the big one I'd like to share.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think from our side, it'd be, I find that the disclosure of people with the disability, the whole confidentiality aspect becomes a hindrance. In that there's a legislative aspect that we've got to kind of respect, and we can't force people, but it also has an impact in terms of how and what support you give the individual. So we'll find that sometimes people would make it overly complicated in that from a confidentiality point of view, you can't release information, you can't capture the information, but I mean, how do you then straddle that in terms of ensuring that you're going to be able to support the person, but by supporting the person, you need to know. You need to then get the line manager sensitized as well, but then you can't disclose because there's a confidentiality aspect. So it's also, so for me, it would be in terms of how, if you look at the people with disabilities are in the minority in the organization. So to make them feel welcome and to make them feel part of, it is to get a buddy for them. You should have that buddy and not necessarily the line manager. That can be that almost like a voice, and that will also then kind of fight the battle if there is one for that individual.
Thank you.